Greetings everyone, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, and I'm back to bring you another episode review from Season 7 of The Loud House. So let's get right into it. Today's episode is What Lies Beneath. In this episode, Dante buries something in the cemetery and he doesn't want anyone to find out who or what it is, so he tries to stop the Morticians Club from giving a supposedly deceased person a proper gravestone. I never thought I'd say something like this ever again, but this is an episode starring the Morticians Club I actually found to be pretty decent. I honestly haven't enjoyed an episode focusing on the goth kids in a long while, last time being the Season 5 episode Frightbite. You may be wondering why that's the case, so allow me to explain. Similar to Frightbite, the biggest selling point to What Lies Beneath is how the story didn't rely on fantasy elements in order to move the story forward. In recent seasons, Lucy and her friends have dabbled quite a bit in fantasy as a means of getting the episode from point A to B. Even though I've mentioned before how I don't necessarily think the series embracing ghostly elements every now and again is a bad thing, such elements start to lose their specialness when they're used over and over to the point where they simply become the norm for episodes starring Lucy and her friends. Not all the time, of course, but I think you get what I'm saying. As for this episode, there are no supernatural elements invoked by anyone, except in one instance where the groundskeeper thinks a ghost is riding on his tractor. However, the tractor running around on its own was because Dante intentionally messed around with it so he could distract the groundskeeper while he dug up what was buried in the unmarked grave. Once again, just like what happens in Frightbite, nothing mystical is pushing the story forward. Everything has an explanation and simply occurs naturally. Even the seance when the kids are trying to figure out who's buried in the unknown grave had nothing supernatural going on. Dante had his cat Virgil use a fog machine to set the mood, and then the cat sneaks through the fog and surprisingly lifts Dante up to make it look like he's possessed and speaking on behalf of the dead guy. It had all the hallmarks of something that looked real and spiritual, but it was all made up by Dante. I know the club could have easily summoned any ghost in the cemetery to find out who's really buried under the tombstone, but I appreciate how the writers decided to refrain from quick and easy fantasy and just let Dante nervously look around at his surroundings and say the dead man's name is Ernie Shovelgate. Speaking of Dante, he was this episode's lead character. Most of the time it's either Lucy or everyone collectively in the club being in the spotlight. Even though Dante is not my favorite club member, my personal favorite is Haiku, I can still appreciate the show for giving a minor recurring character their own episode. Dante's conflict is how the Morticians Club wanted to give a dead man in an unmarked grave a proper headstone, but his attempt to speak on Ernie's behalf by saying they don't need to do anything special for him doesn't work. That's when he and his cat intentionally break things at a funeral retail store as a way of forcing his friends to spend all their club money on broken merchandise instead of a headstone. Then the club goes to a quarry to make their own headstone, and Dante tries to keep everyone busy by telling them to inscribe the entire Raven poem with footnotes in both Latin and cursive. Meanwhile, he goes to retrieve what he buried in the ground, but his friends return and they discover what was really hidden beneath the dirt. It was actually Auntie Pam. Ice cream. Yes, Dante buried a cooler full of his favorite ice cream 5 feet below the ground because he didn't want to share any of it with his friends. Hey, he's a 9-year-old boy, what do you expect? Ordinarily, I would question why he couldn't just bury this stuff in his own backyard, but then I remembered he's a goth kid who loves death, so him burying something he loves in a cemetery makes total sense. Anyway, this shocking revelation helps Lucy and the others finally understand why Dante was acting strangely paranoid about the club wanting to give Ernie a proper headstone, not to mention why he effectively screwed the club out of their money, time, and energy for someone who never even existed. Then again, it's unclear why having a headstone with a fake name on it would be a bad thing in the long run. If Dante knew such a person didn't exist but everyone else thought otherwise, what exactly would be the problem? My guess would be there would come a time when the kids actually wanted to talk to Ernie himself instead of Dante speaking for him. Chances are Dante would only be able to keep up the charade for so long until either his scheme was exposed by some careless mistake on his part, or some ghost or even the groundskeeper would eventually figure out there is no Ernie Shovelgate in the cemetery. Either way, Dante apologizes for his deceitful behavior and decides to share his ice cream with his friends. Not exactly the best way to handle the concept of learning to share, but Morpheus did make a comment in the beginning and at the end how Dante is terrible at sharing, so I guess that counts as foreshadowing the ending, even though it's a very weak way of doing so. Overall, this episode may not be amazing and it's very basic in its storytelling, but for an episode about about the Morticians Club, it was pretty decent compared to a few of their other adventures from seasons 5 and 6. Their usual brand of supernatural fantasy took a back seat in favor of keeping things simpler and more realistic, and Dante got to have his own episode. For the most part, he handled himself pretty well from start to finish. He definitely had his moments, like the part where he kept getting sprayed by the cemetery sprinklers. We also got to explore a bit of his character by learning he befriended a cat in the cemetery, and how he has, or I guess had, a hard time sharing with others, especially when it comes to his favorite flavor of ice cream. As for the rest of the Morticians Club, I really don't have that much to say other than they just wanted to do their part for a supposedly dead man by giving him a proper headstone. At the very least, I can respect their commitment to treating all deceased people the same and not wanting any one of them to feel forgotten. So if you're looking for a decent episode where fantasy is pretty much non-existent and how everything feels very much down to earth, I'd recommend giving this one a watch. It's not perfect, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're a fan of Lucy and or the Morticians Club. With that said, I give What Lies Beneath a 7.8 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of What Lies Beneath. So I gotta ask, what did you guys think of this episode? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to click that subscribe button for more Loud House related content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.